Hello, and welcome to The Scaling Game. This is a podcast where we discuss how we've helped direct response advertisers find and fix what's preventing them from scaling their business. I'm Sammy Afrin. I'm the head of creative strategy at Deciphered. Alongside me in this episode and every other, you will see John Belcher. He is the founder of Deciphered. In today's episode, we're going to discuss how we help the high-ticket information product business decrease their CPAs by 60%, allowing them to 5x the size of their business in 5 months. Yes, 5x in 5 months. I know, sounds exciting and you want to hear all about it, but first, let me remind you to please go watch the first episode of The Scaling Game if you've not yet seen it. It's somewhere around 15 minutes long and it just lays out the rule of the game. Watching that episode will ensure that this case study and every other is as valuable to you as possible. So, enough of me chit-chatting here. Let's dive into the specifics of this study. I'll see you there. Okie dokie, Mr. Belcher, hello. Today we are talking lead generation, ebook opt-ins, accelerated debt payoff. You know the case study. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so this was a typical, like when we talk about the vertical, this is high ticket sales, right? You're doing lead generation, they're getting on the phone call. It was a blend, one call is probably more 2 call closes, but it was a very typical like high ticket sales funnel. The background behind this was actually right after I put out my first course with ad skills. It was called Bulletproof YouTube Ads. The founder watched the video, said, hey, we want to do some more advertising on YouTube. Could you help my partner and I out? And I said, well, I've done it with this other group that we talked about in the last case study, but this is a different funnel from what I'm used to. Happy to come in and do an audit with you to figure out if we can make anything happen. And then kind of go from there. So that was how I was brought into the engagement.
You were brought in to do YouTube. Once you got foot in the door, it became a more comprehensive look at kind of all of their paid traffic efforts?
Yeah, so background on it. Once I got into the audit, they had a Facebook agency that was running YouTube ads. Did a quick audit. They were spending about 20% of the budget in another country. So it was very quick, like, okay, the spend's not being managed. We're going to have you do this. Okay, cool. So I went in and tightened it up. They had a good ad, but when we talk about like performance, right? There was no media buying magic that was just automatically just going to make things run and or scale. And so what was important for this is I started as the media buyer, right? But quickly said, if I want to help this company perform, I'm going to have to figure out how to improve the funnel so that we could actually have the ability, like we can afford to go spend more. And so that was kind of where the onus came down, is they were currently capped out on their CPAs. They had a high ticket process. They could afford about $750 a customer. And so this was my challenge, was to how do I improve the CPAs so we can go scale more?
So this is pre-packaged scaling game. I think this is even pre where, why, how process. However, we can look back retroactively and still apply the same lens to this problem. So first question I think I always like to ask when we start looking at the where, looking at the numbers, looking at their equation was when you came in, you broke it out into progression rates, right? We've got the funnel broken out into all its different steps. Did you have benchmarks? What were you comparing it against? And if you didn't, did something just obviously stand out as the issue? Kind of let's now dive into the math and look at the numerical breakdown.
Yeah, so I think first question is, at this stage, I did not have benchmarks. This was brand new to me. This was my first lead generation opt-in funnel. And what's kind of funny about this was before YouTube ads even had clicks. So this was measuring organic search traffic, right?
Yeah.
I had a process for going through and making that happen. But ultimately, what we're looking at here was I didn't have benchmarks. I went through and laid out all of the information. And for any techies who care, this was a combination of Google Analytics 4 data, and then on the back end with the sales process, talking with the sales teams to understand what's the conversion rate. So, so we put this nice little sheet right here together. This is data analytics, being able to go through and piece all these things together. But really the only things that I could control were the number of people visiting the site from the ads, right? So that's a combination of ad creative, targeting, what have you. And once again, there was no clicks. So on this sheet, you'll see ad clicks and landing page views are the same because that was the same number, right?
Right.
So I could either control the number of people coming from the ads or the opt-in rate. I didn't have any control of the sales process after that. Now, obviously,
Right.
lead quality is going to impact those things, so it plays in with it. But those are really the only two levers that I could look at, right? And so I'd seen that they tested quite a few ads. The ad was really good. We ended up running this ad for 3 years.
Wow.
So it was a really good ad. The audience was as dialed in as it was going to be, right? And so from this perspective, I really, by process of elimination, only had one thing that I could work on, which was the opt-in rate.
Yeah.
But now looking back at this, so I'm just going to circle here from the where perspective. Our opt-in rate was where we wanted to focus our efforts. Now that we have benchmarks and things, this would have been mathematically extremely clear that this was well below month work, right? But that was kind of the process of being able to understand, and sometimes it's by process of elimination, where do we have to improve our numbers to make these things work.
All right. So again, anytime we go through our, I don't know what you're going to call it, funnel process, right? Like funnel analysis process. We start with it's where, it's why, it's then it's how. We've identified where. Okay, well, where is the opt-in rate? This opt-in rate is abysmal. We've got people getting to the point of opting in. The ebook was free, right? Like it was a free ebook. Okay, so yeah, so they're not being asked to pull out a credit card. They're not asked any of that stuff. So we're obviously saying like, what's going on where people don't want something free? You can kind of almost start to shimmy your way into the why there pretty easily, I think. But again, I'm imagining that you saw this opt-in rate. You're like, okay, let me look at everything before it in the funnel to again understand what's leading people to this point. After you did this kind of analysis, the whys began to shake out. What were they?
Yeah, so just to kind of put this on the screen so everyone can see, whenever we find our where, we go look upstream to see what's disconnected. And so once again, what was important for me is at this stage in the game, right? When you're talking about YouTube ads, people couldn't click. So they literally had to open a new tab on their browser and search for your business.
Yeah.
It's pretty apparent from the traffic that's coming and the cost of a site visit. The ad's doing its job, right?
Right. That's some pretty high intent, right? If someone, that's high intent. Like
the other kind of background context is all that was being asked for was a name and an email address. So it's about as low barrier as you can get from an opt-in process, right? And so for me, this was one of the things where I sat down and I said, okay, let me watch the ad. Let me go type in the name and search, click on it, join the website, and as a user, what's going on here? So I went through, watched the ad made sense, very clear value prop, went and Googled. Couple things that we did on the search the search results, just to make sure that we had an AdWords ad there. We had everything built up around it, so it looked like legitimate site. But once we got to the site, right, this was where things broke down. So it was a very basic site. Like this was pre-click funnels, so this was a pretty boring. Not like it was pretty basic elementary site, and to be frank, it didn't look super trustworthy. It looked a little spammy. I think it had a post-it yellow background, right? So it was just like one of those things where it was just a little off-putting.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, the other thing is this was a big claim about debt payoffs that was very easy for people to go like, I don't believe you.
Yeah, too good to be true kind of thing. Yeah.
And there was no proof that this thing actually worked. So you're trying to get people, this was targeting people who had money to say, how can we accelerate debt payoff, right? And from that perspective, you have people who do have money who are good at keeping their money, which means they're very discerning, right?
Right.
So when we talk about why, I'm just going to write down here, and I'm going to write as slowly and clearly as I can. Lack of trust.
Yeah.
This to me was, we were just missing some very important basic trust factors. And people may go, well, we have tons of trust factors. But I think what's important about this discussion is a lot of people have screenshots and testimonials and whatever. What you will see through the course of this podcast series is that what you need to focus on is the right trust.
Yeah.
So social proof of, just having quotes or screenshots or whatever, it's so easy to go make up a screenshot. I love the movie War Dogs. These guys fooled the federal government by making fake invoices to get a $300 million contract.
Yeah.
It is really easy to make up testimonials, social proof, what have you, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so what's important here when you're building trust factors and social proof is real legit stuff. And just to call a quick timeout, the reason we decided to do a podcast to show that our process works is we can't make up 45 minutes of content times all of the number of episodes. Like, you actually have to know and understand this stuff to be able to talk through it.
Right.
This is why we chose this type of trust and social proof. And so that's what was important here for me is like, this was about not just we're lacking trust, but what's the right trust.
Well, I think it so often now we take so for granted the ideas of social proof and testimonial. You know, now we're in the we're like post UGC era. We're kind of almost post influencer selling stuff. Like, we've gone through. This was before I think influencer was even really like a thing, right? A job, a way to make money, a way to advertise, anything like that, right? So we take that for granted now because we're very used to now, because the market has followed this idea of, I guess, testimonial or social proof by way of someone like me. Someone who is me, so the same kind of person. We take that for granted now, but back in the day, I mean, it's not back in the day, you know, it's like not even 10 years ago, but you know what I mean. We take those things for granted now, but especially in the high ticket space, especially when you're talking to people, like you said, who already have money, the trust has to be there, right? It must be there. So this is visually, it was apparent, but it was also lacking trust. So it lacked visual trust as far as legitimacy, right? The visual weight of the site did not match the claims being made, nor did the messaging on the site match the claims in the ad that were being made. That's what we could kind of boil it down to.
Yeah, there was a major disconnect in messaging and efficacy, like proof of efficacy.
Okay.
That's ultimately, like, people just didn't trust it, so they didn't keep going.
Right. Okay, so our opt-in rate, abysmal. Why? There's a lack of trust from the ad to the site, basically. This is where we start to build the hypotheses, right? So what was your hypotheses on how we were going to fix it?
Yeah, so there was a couple points to this. Number one was just more clarity of message, right?
Okay.
And this also is plus continuity, which you
so
can
continuity
go off on
meaning,
that topic.
oh, don't get me started.
Yeah.
I don't even want to go. Don't even get me started. Continuity meaning, guys, what you're saying in your ad is followed up and supported by whatever comes after it, be it a landing page, a VSL, a product page, like whatever. And it's important. Do it. I'll keep it clipped at that because like I could get on my soapbox for sure.
Okay. So I wrote down two things here. It felt to me that there needed to be more clarity of messaging and continuity from the ad to the site.
Okay.
And then the second piece was social proof that was addressing the common objections. And so I wanted to talk about results, but from the Facebook ad testing that the other agency was doing, one of the biggest comments that kept popping up was spam. Or like, scam, this won't work, what have you.
Yeah.
It's too good to be true. Like it just over and over and over and over. Yeah. And so for me, it was one of those things where it was like, okay, we have to be more clear in the message that we're putting out. And then we also have to address the things that people are commonly fighting against, right? And so these were kind of the two factors in the hypothesis. I believe that a more clear and continuous message a message was more clear and there's more continuity compared with social proof addressing common objections would drastically improve our performance and therefore allow us to scale.
Okay. So I'm assuming this had to manifest itself in a complete and total site rebuild and message restructure.
Correct. And I'll kind of walk through the actual how of that process. Yeah. So first thing that we do when we're doing messaging is sitting down and leveraging David Fry's 12-step foolproof sales letter template. You'll hear me talk about this in everything that we do. And the reason for it is David wrote it like 30 years ago. And it works then with direct mail, and it works now with every platform you can think of, right? Selling is selling. It's about
direct response is direct response. That's what it boils down to, right? Like whether it's a snail mail or like online, it's still direct response.
Totally. So we follow the same formula because it's proven. We didn't come up with it. We've definitely tweaked it over the years to make it more useful for us. But at the same time, we started with a formula, a recipe, right? Went in and filled in the different components to ensure that the ad messaging tied in with that layout. And then what I worked with the client is a ton of time on the social proof piece And what I will say is one of the co-founders was awesome at doing this, just sitting down with people and talking about stuff. And so while I love to talk about positive impact, we're never the only people who come up with ideas, right?
Yeah, of course.
And so I brought up this concept to the co-founder of, hey, I'm seeing a lot of these like too good to be true, scam, what have you. And so what he started doing in client testimonials is sat down and he's like, what was the biggest thing that you were nervous about before you started the program? And so that's how he started every single discussion, right?
Total reverse, reverse card on him.
And so when we put in the social proof, it would talk about like so-and-so did X and Y time frame. But the video started with that question. So it was like immediately people weren't just like, oh, I did this. It was like, oh, this was my biggest concern.
Yeah, objection handling right up front. Yeah.
Totally. I'm glad I didn't listen to this because here's what it was able to happen. So like from the editing perspective, they did a really nice job of taking all of those components, front loading them, and then digging in the case study to talk about how it actually worked. And so it was just really, really good work as a team to go in and get the necessary components. So we structured the message, worked on the social proof. The other thing that they had that they weren't leveraging to the level that they should have been was they actually had paid to be on a news segment to be featured with this. And so that's actually the video that we put up at the very top of the site was featured on the local news, right? Once again, just talking about social proof.
Yeah, if you're ever on the news, if you own a business and you're ever on the news, use it as an ad.
Yeah. And so it was just really important of message structure, clarity, and then validity, right?
Like third-party validation in a sense, too. Yeah.
Totally. So from this, when we talk about how this was a true site rebuild, and so they did everything. They did full branding, new site, what have you. Once we had structured the message, my role in the process really came down to working with the designer to not strip the teeth out of the sales message.
Like the developer, like the page designer?
Yeah, so the people that were actually like building the site.
Okay.
What happens sometimes when we're working with creative people is they go, well, this is too intense. This is not
This isn't pretty.
Mess with the sales. Yeah. And so it was for us of like, well, this really important headline is kind of like tucked away and we need this to be front and center, right? And so that was my role of saying, how do we take this great message that we've laid out? They do their thing on the visual side and we confirm that the emphasis on the sales piece is there. And then what we did was, so we built this as an A/B test with the site.
Okay.
So we took the old site and then said the new one, and it was like, well, we just paid however much for this new site. We hope this thing works. Set it live with the ads, and then we'll talk about the results. But that's ultimately the process. It took, I want to say, almost 2 months to get everything done. But it was a pretty major way of doing this, right? And so that was something for me of it was really well thought out, planned, and comprehensive.
So in this 2 months of building and planning and preparation, and I know I can speak for myself, anytime there's like any sort of lengthy build process, there's kind of that imposter syndrome that starts to creep in, right? And you're like, oh, this is a lot of work for an idea that might not work. Like, and this was earlier on in your career, but also without the experience. You said this was your first time really doing like YouTube for like exclusively YouTube for a client. Was there any of this where you kind of did that process, the drawn out process, make your faith waver at all?
No, I think what was important about this was I had seen, as we talked about in the prior case study, the importance of having a good sales message. And so for me, I was like, this is, once again, going back to our where, it was the only thing that we could work on, right? Yeah. So we definitely tested a few things between that full rebuild of doing messaging testing.
Okay, this was going to be my question was like...
We definitely we saw pieces of smoke, and we'll kind of talk about this at the end of the day, but we weren't doing this on blind faith. Okay. I would do it differently now where we would just like rapidly test a few things just to confirm there was smoke there. But once again, that's how the process worked.
So this long, drawn out 2 month process of building, getting the messaging just right, back and forth with the designers, getting the testimonials queued up just perfect. Okay, it comes to an end. We put a pen in development. We're A/B testing. We flip on the A/B test. We're doing 50% to the old page,
Yep.
50 to the new? Was it even 50 split? All right, what happened?
Yeah, so literally overnight, what we saw was that our opt-in rate, so historically this was 8%. It went up to 20, and I'm pretty sure it went higher than that, but I remember 20% when we were running at scale, right?
That's pretty good.
Yeah, and once again, from a benchmark perspective, like this is now, having done this for so long, like we would absolutely expect this, right?
Yeah,
this would be a minimum target in most cases, unless we're asking for more information. So we got it up to a benchmark, continue to optimize, work through those different things. But once again, when we talk about this effort did three things for the business, right? It created profitability, room in the math to scale. It improved the algorithm, and then allowed us to diversify. So we'll kind of work through these here. But anything that you want to ask before we start that?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I kind of already know a little, having done the prep for this, I kind of know I know what happens. Let's just talk about it.
So when we talk about profitability, right? What's important here is the cost per lead went from $25 down to 10, right?
Yeah.
And then, so we're saving $15 per lead. But the question with anyone who does lead gen is always, okay, well, we saw someone do Facebook lead form ads and they're $2 and we were at 10, but do they actually back out? And the answer to that was yes. At a bare minimum, it was the same, if not better, right? Because we had reinforced the messaging from the ad with all of this proof. So going through, the actual CPA was cut more than in half, went from 750 down to about 300, which created massive room in our campaigns so that we could now afford to scale, right? And so that's number one. Profitability was checked. And then we always have a dash with this one. So did we create profitability? Yes. And then the question with the business is, do you want to pocket this?
Right.
Or do you want to reinvest it because you could afford 750? You just weren't getting the volume that you wanted. So if you care about volume and you're still making profit on the back end, going from there.
Right.
And so this was, yes, we created profitability and then we wanted to reinvest it, right? So that was really
in this now I do have a question. All of your testing was happening on YouTube. You were doing the landing page URLs, the split test, all of that was happening through YouTube. I'm assuming this won out, right? How did this, or maybe it did or didn't, but I'm assuming this positively impacted Facebook traffic as well.
For sure. What was interesting about this particular client is the messaging that we were using on YouTube wasn't allowed on Facebook. So there was policy
disapprovals.
Makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
So Facebook at the time wasn't as big of a player.
Okay.
But yeah, absolutely, it made a difference on Facebook. It was just one that it was more heavily focused on YouTube.
Okay, so understood. So we've gotten, again, did they achieve making more money because of this change? Yes, check. They decided to reinvest it and go for volume as opposed to just pocketing the margin. Okay, fantastic. How does this impact the machine learning and the algorithm side of things for their business within the
so I think what's important about this is at this particular time, YouTube advertising was still in its infancy, right? So we're not talking about target CPA campaigns. We had video views that we could see conversions coming through. It was almost always view through conversions was how that was attributed. So with this particular use case, it made a difference. But if this were happening today, the impact would be absolutely astronomical. So I think what's important here is when we initially started, the spend, so for $2,000 in spend, when we started, we were getting 80 conversions. Same $2,000, we were getting 200 conversions, right?
Yes.
Makes a massive difference. And so what's once again really important for us, and I don't think I mentioned this in the last episode, 50 conversions per ad set per day. This is kind of our benchmark metric of what we're trying to achieve. This is ultimately where you get to, and the machine learning, everyone calls it the algorithm, which is why we call it the algorithm, but like the machine learning has a big enough data set that it can start to get better at predictions, right? Yeah. And so this is really what we are trying to achieve is how do we get to 50 conversions per ad set per day? As you can see here, when we were spending $2,000 over a period of time and only getting 80, that wasn't per day, right? We weren't able to afford to spend this much per day because we were at our CPA limits. Right. But once we get to the spot where we're spending 2,000 and getting 200, this is really what allowed us to continue to go on to that next level and go from there. So
it's compounded wins. So when we talk about diversification, then knowing this was YouTube reliant, and then probably knowing it, you also alluded to policy problems, it probably wasn't the easiest to diversify this across other major ad networks, right? TikTok didn't exist yet. That wasn't an option. I don't think Snapchat was really the place to go and advertise for this. So this probably diversification wise likely became a game of creative diversification. And then I'm assuming there was some pivots toward attempting other ad networks, but let's talk about the diversification process.
Yeah. So biggest thing I'll say with this one is I was now at the point, having done this 2 times as an individual traffic guy, right? So I'd done it with the case study from the last episode and this one. I was confident in my ability to make an impact on people's funnels. And I had a belief in diversification. In the last case study we talked about, it was Facebook, Google, YouTube, and Twitter, right?
Yeah.
But this was so early in the game, I didn't understand the absolute vital importance for nonstop growth. And looking back at this would have been an amazing offer to run on native. This would have been something that if I had the tools back then that we have now, oh my gosh, I would have done 100 different things here.
I don't think it was necessarily you that didn't I don't think the market was that mature yet. I don't think our industry was honestly that mature yet. Like, we're literally talking about a time before like YouTube really had like clickable ads, right? So the change in the industry in the 10-year period we're talking about is exponential. I mean, that's probably the definition of exponential. So I don't think, don't be too tough on yourself. Hindsight's 20/20, but so the diversification then, like you said, like you're thinking now, I would do this and I would have put it on all the native networks and would have done all these different things. What did you do back then?
Yeah. So let's first thing just talk about the results that we achieved, right? So with this particular client, we 5x'd the business in 5 months.
I know what my tagline for the intro is going to be for that one, for this one.
Yeah. I mean, this is a big deal, right? We were able to move from, low 6 figures to like getting up to the point of doing serious volume.
Yeah.
And it was, something that this for me was like, this is making a huge difference for a business. It's super exciting to see. But I want to kind of talk about the scaling process. This is why we have our staircase over here, right? So when we initially started, we were stuck here. I'm going to change colors. This will be easier if we have a different color to see. Okay. So, whoops. Of course, decides to change on me. When we initially... Oh, man, you are killing me today, bro.
My pencil... Okay. Mercury's almost in retrograde. It's okay. We can blame it on Mercury. That doesn't mean anything to you because you're logical, but...
So I came here. We were stuck.
Yeah.
This is... we had an opt-in problem, right?
Yeah.
So we came through here, we fixed this, and we were able to scale our spend. This is what took us to our next plateau, right? Once we got here, though, we were stuck, and our real reason was we had one ad.
Right?
This was kind of the limiting factor at this particular point. So we went through here, and this is where we started doing more creative testing.
Okay.
Right? And so we got to the point where we were leveraging the hero video that ran for 3 years, but we also started layering in different things, did some retargeting, etc. But client testimonials, people talking about, I achieved this, and here's what I used for it. That worked. The news segment we ran as an ad, that worked really well. So it was really that process, like the origin. We like to talk about message stacking now. Yeah. This was kind of the origin of... We have our hero, and it's probably going to be really hard to beat this. But how do we continue to get more creatives layered in there? And so that was a big part for us when it came to scaling our spend, was getting these things in place so we could continue to run from there. And so once we got stuck here, when we talk about like where are we stuck, right? YouTube had been maxed.
Yeah.
This was a big issue. And so this was where at this particular time, I now had control of both platforms, right? And so now this was this process of starting to leverage Facebook in a bigger way, right? So this, when we came up to here, this was platforms is what got us to that next level. Now, personally for me, I would say when we're looking at this, the question when we're looking at this stair step process for scaling is how big are the steps? How high is that step? And then how far is, so like we'll talk frequency. About height, the height, and then the width of how long those things took. This is really what you and I are continuing to work on to this very day. Optimizing is how do we make the steps as big as they can possibly be? And then how we make the plateaus as short as they can be, right? Yeah. And so this is really important for me working through this. Right now, I would have put 10 times the amount of effort on making Facebook more successful. If I look back, it was too small of a step. I wish this was a bigger step. But this is ultimately that part we got to of like, this is performing extremely well. YouTube's crushing it. We're working through these different things. I feel that we did a good job getting the funnel fixed, getting more ads into play. I really just would have focused more heavily on platforms because the message worked so well. Once again, the only thing was policy limited us slightly. Right. But that would have really been for me of like, this made a difference, but this is what I would have done differently.
So it's easy to look back on things 10 years, however long it's been on, right? And be like, oh, I woulda, coulda, shoulda, woulda, coulda, shoulda, woulda. I don't always find that, not that it's not super helpful to do that, but ultimately I think the more valuable question to be asking yourself, not shoulda, coulda, woulda, what would I do now, but the more valuable question that I want to know the answer to is, what was your biggest learning? Like when we look forward then, so instead of starting now and looking back on this case, let's take yourself, you go be John Belcher back then. What was the learning that carried from this point forward to inform our current process now?
This was important for me. I use the same process I use on case study 1 of looking at the math to figure out where the problem was. This is the origin of our entire process, right?
Okay.
And it really, that was that part of the reason a lot of people will ask, like, have you ever worked in this vertical? And I'll give you a great case study right now. Our number one client runs a funnel type that we, sorry, one second. I'll make sure the screen shares. Runs a funnel type that we had never, ever worked with, right?
Right.
And so what people are always asking us is, well, does this work in this vertical, right? And the nice part for me is the math is the math. It's going to help you identify where your leaks, your bottlenecks are. This was really important from this case study of, could we apply this to an e-commerce business, a webinar business, a VSL business? This was the start. It's definitely something that has completely grown since this time. This for me was really important to show the process works with more than one business type. Maybe I should continue to lean more and more heavily into this.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, again, looking at it now, like it's so obvious to, like, I don't even question things like progression rate and talking about, the scaling equations and those type of things because they're just so second nature now. But it's interesting, I guess, to really pull back and you could look at this 1,000 different ways. And even listening to this episode, you could pull a million different learnings, but your biggest learning as the person who was executing things then and also looking back on it now is, oh, wow, math holds true no matter what. And we've kind of stuck to that. Yeah, we're sitting here talking about it now,
Yeah, and I think what's really important for people to understand is what you will see over the course of the next few episodes is that the process of finding your where, your why, and your how, you may run into the exact same where, but that why and how can be so drastically different. On top of that, one of the most... Yeah, and what the other thing on top of that is the first thing that we do now with math, which I've learned along the way, is once you get good at this, you start to get a little bit of superhero syndrome where you're like, I can do this on anybody's business, right?
Yeah.
And it's true that the process will work, but the question is, will their economics work?
This is what I was going to say.
Yeah. This is a huge reason why a big portion of our vetting process is, what are you trying to achieve? And are your goals feasible?
Yeah.
If you need a 9% conversion rate to be able to be profitable, the numbers are like, this process will work. It'll help you improve your sales process. But if your profitability goals aren't realistic, we should never do this. And that's kind of the other part for me working through this process is this process works on any funnel type, but does that funnel type actually going to make it possible for that person to hit their profitability goals?
Well, the only way to find out is to try it. And in order to try it, you probably need to have some more examples of how to do it. And we have plenty more of those coming up in the next several episodes. I think we're tackling a couple e-com clients next. Like you said, we'll have some situations that have the same where, different whys, and how. So we're really going to start getting into kind of more of the nuance and the nitty gritty of how we apply this process as it kind of matures through the timeline of what's brought us from here to there. So, John, unless you have anything else you'd like to add to this episode, I think we should look on forward to our next episode.
Yeah, my request for any listeners is if you could leave a comment letting us know, like, what are you finding helpful about this? Are there particular insights? Are there discussions that you're finding most helpful? Our goal is to put out content that showcases our process, but I also want to ensure that we can hit on things that are interesting to people. If talking about the algorithm is pointless, okay, let us know. But we want to make sure that
we're making it up as we go, guys. As far as the podcast part, like it's we're learning too. So any data we can get as far as feedback from you all to improve and be better is absolutely welcomed.
Agreed. That's it.
All right, guys. We will see you in the next one. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for watching The Scaling Game. John and I know that time is your most valuable currency, so we do not take your attention lightly. If you could do us a solid and drop a comment below, letting us know what you loved, what you hated, whatever it is, leave the comment so that we can read that comment and then go and use it to inform our future content. We appreciate that as well. If you have interest in working with the team at Deciphered, you can head on over to deciphered.com. That's Deciphered with a Y. Fill out the lead form, and then we will reach out to you to schedule a feasibility assessment. Outside of that, guys, that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you in the next one.